Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. For today's video we have the eyeshadow palette tag part 2. This tag was created by Allie and Samantha March. If you are new here, my name is Natalie. I post videos all about makeup and beauty. If you like what you see here today, I hope you will consider subscribing before you leave, but why don't we get started? So like I said, this is part 2 of the eyeshadow palette tag. I do think I did do the part 1 of this tag, so thought why not do the part 2. Eyeshadow palettes are one of my favourite things to talk about, so thought this would be fun. There are 10 or 11 prompts to go through. I will try and remember to link the prompts in the description box below if you do want to do this video yourself. I will also tag Samantha's and Allie's videos in the description box too. So the first prompt is all-time favourite palette, and for this one I had to go for the Natasha Denona Glam palette because this is such a staple in my collection. This is my kind of fail-safe palette in that if I can't think of looks that I want to create out of other palettes, or there isn't another palette of mine that immediately springs to mind that I want to use, this is my kind of safety zone. There's always a look I can create out of this palette. I'm never not inspired whenever I open this palette. This is one that I just can create multiple different looks out of, and I'm always happy with each one. It is my sort of safety blanket neutral palette that I love reaching for. I never realised how much I was into cool tone shadows until I picked this palette up. So this one I would say is definitely an all-time favourite and one I reach for time and time again. If there was a category of most reach for palette in 2021, this one would definitely fit that bracket too. So absolutely love this palette, and even though it is probably my most expensive palette in my collection, I don't regret my purchase for a second. Next is new favourite palette. I actually found this one quite difficult to answer because I have a lot of palettes that are favourites, but I don't know if they are necessarily new. So I tried to look at the kind of last 5 palettes that entered my collection that I've actually tried. So the palette that I picked is this one from Huda Beauty. This is the Mercury Retrograde palette. This is something that I did get in the Glossybox calendar that I opened in December, and this was the Christmas Day palette. So I haven't used it the most amount of times, but it is a palette that I do think I'm going to get quite a lot of use out of because I like that it is something slightly different. It does have the staple neutrals in here, which again are my kind of safety zone, but it does have a couple of pops of colour in here, but they're not too bright of a colour, so I feel like I can easily incorporate them into a look. I have only reached for this one a handful of times. I just haven't been reaching for eyeshadow as of late. In case you are not aware, I did have a new baby at the beginning of January, and say I did only get this Christmas Day, but I did wear this quite a few times over the Christmas period and I did like the looks I created. So because it said new favourite, that's why I thought this was the best one to fit the category, and I say I do think I am going to like it more. From what I've tried with this palette, I do really enjoy it, and say I do think it will become a favourite in my collection, and I was so excited to get it in the advent calendar. Next is a palette that I keep for the memories, and without doubt it's got to be the original Urban Decay Naked palette. This is easily the oldest palette in my collection. It was the first ever high-end palette that I ever purchased. It was also a palette that I purchased on my honeymoon when I went to California for a couple of weeks, so it has all those kind of memories attached to it as well. It's the first eyeshadow palette I ever used to create a look with more than one shade because I was always just a one and done kind of out the door, so this does have a lot of memories and it is a palette I don't think I'll ever get rid of. Has it long since expired? Probably. But I don't notice that the formula performs any worse than when I first purchased it. So for me, I'm still more than happy to use it, and it is a fantastic product that I'm so sad that they did discontinue because there are so many people getting into makeup now that won't have the joy of this being their first palette. Next is an underrated eyeshadow palette, and for this one I picked from Too Faced the Born This Way The Natural Nudes palette. This is one that I just don't feel like anyone really talked about. Even when it first came out, I seen a handful of reviews on it, but that was about it. The reviews that I did see on it were pretty positive, so I was surprised that this one didn't kind of catch on. I am actually intrigued as to see what palettes were released at the same time as this one that might have made this one not seem as interesting as them. I can't quite remember. But for me, this is the perfect neutral palette because it does have the kind of gradient of neutrals. You've got your lighter ones here all the way up to smoky, and this was the palette before I got the Natasha Denona Glam one that I reached for if I wasn't really inspired with all of my other palettes and I just wanted a staple neutral look without much thought involved. It was this one. So the Natasha Denona one has kind of trumped this one as my all-time favourite, but this one I feel like is so underrated. There's hardly any people talk about it, and it is a great palette. I hadn't had the best of luck with Too Faced's formula until I tried this one, and I feel like this is so much better than what I'd tried in the past. So yeah, a great palette that you can still get hold of and I would recommend. Then we have a palette that is not a favourite but you can't get rid of, and for this one I went for the Colourpop collaboration with Barbie. This is the Malibu Barbie palette. It's definitely a lot brighter than what I tend to reach for. I was drawn in with the fact that it was Barbie. I was obsessed with Barbie as a child and I've kind of passed that obsession onto my daughter. She does currently play with my Barbies from the 90s, so when this came out we were deep into playing with those Barbies. It was all about nostalgia and that's why I picked it up. It's also why I don't think I could ever declutter it, because even though it's a palette I don't reach for an awful lot because of the brighter shades. Yes, okay, it does have a couple of neutrals in here, but they are quite pigmented and they can pack a punch as well. So it's a bit of an intimidating palette for me in some respects, which is why I don't reach for it. But because of it being Barbie, I just could never part with it. And even if I stopped using it, I'd probably just pass it on to my daughter as kind of play makeup anyway. So formula-wise, I can't fault it. It is one of the best formula-wise palettes from Colourpop that I've tried. Say the pigmentation and the shades, they do blend beautifully. It's just colour story-wise, I never really know what look to create with this. There are a few shades in here, like the blue and the yellow, that I'm probably never going to reach for, but it is a really nice palette, so it's not one I'll be able to get rid of. Next is my favourite collaboration palette, and this one was so easy to decide, and to be honest, this palette could have fitted into quite a lot of the categories here. This is the collaboration between Colourpop and Star Wars and The Mandalorian. This is the Child palette. I am a huge fan of green shadows, and this to me is the perfect green palette. It is different than any other green palettes or green shades I have in my collection. It's such a unique palette, but it's also so easy to use. The formula of this is again one of the best that I've tried from Colourpop. All of the shades blend beautifully, all the shimmers are fantastic, and this is a palette that kind of, if I lost all palettes in my collection, again bar the Natasha Denona Glam palette, I would have to keep this one because I just love it so much. And I just wish I kind of felt more confident wearing green kind of on a daily basis, because I just love reaching for this one. This was close to being my all-time favourite, but because of it being green I felt like I did have to go for a neutral palette. But there is another prompt which I think might be the next prompt, which this one could have easily fallen into as well. So because it is a collaboration, I thought this was the perfect one to include here, because this is a fantastic palette and it is one you can still get hold of. So if you are someone that likes green shadows but are slightly intimidated by them, I would highly recommend this, because these are the easiest green shadows to work with. Next category is 2021 favourite. Like I said, the Child palette could have easily fitted into that slot, but I did want to put a different palette for each of the prompts. So for this one, I went for the Urban Decay Naked Honey palette. This is one that I could kind of call my surprise of the year, because this is one that I sort of picked up on a whim because it was heavily discounted one day. When it was first released, it was never a palette that drew me in, but I seen it was heavily discounted. I think I got it for basically 50% off, so I thought I'd give it a go. I've never tried a bad naked palette from Urban Decay. I love all the ones that I've got. It's a great formula. It's got the right level of pigmentation. They're really easy to blend. The shimmers are really nice, and I find that these are some of the longest lasting shadows in my collection. So I got this one to kind of complete the set that I have. I was definitely surprised by this one, and it is one that I've reached for so much more than I thought I would. I think what kind of intimidated me were these two brighter shades in the middle here, but there are some other neutrals in here that you can reach for if you don't want that bright gold look. But for me, it's a palette that is a bit versatile in that, yes, okay, it is kind of monochromatic, but you can get the brighter looks, you can get the dark sultry looks, and then you do have a couple of neutrals in here to be more of an everyday look. So this is a palette that I definitely reach for more than I expected in 2021. Next, we have a palette that I didn't expect to love. Again, the Naked Honey could kind of go into that one, but for this one, I decided to go for the BH Cosmetics Smitten in Switzerland. This is one that I picked up when they had a deal. I think it was on Beauty Bay. It was like buy two, get one free or something like that. So this was one that I was drawn in by the colour story, but didn't really expect much of it. Didn't think I'd get an awful lot of use out of it. I just thought it might be more of an accent palette. But this is one, again, kind of like the Naked Honey, I reach for much more than I thought I would. I love the shimmers in here because they are kind of pastel-y but also do pack a decent amount of punch. The only issue with this one is I do get quite a bit of fallout, but it brushes away quite easily, but that's just something to note. But I do like that this is more of a unique colour story in my collection, and it does have a couple of shades which are individually kind of unique to my collection as well. Plus it's also got the green shades that I feel like I kind of crave, and the two greens in this palette are really pretty. So I got this one because it was part of the deal. I thought it might be quite nice to try a bit more of a colour story from BH Cosmetics, but yeah, this one definitely surprised me. I didn't think I'd love it as much as I do. Next is a palette that sparks joy. Again, there are quite a few ones that I've already mentioned that could fall into this category. The Natasha Denona Glam Sparks Joy because it's just so easy to use. The Child Sparks Joy because it's that little bit of colour. But because I didn't want to mention them again, I ended up actually going for the palette that I have on my eyes today. And it is another one from Colourpop, and it is the Limoncello palette. This is one that I was immediately drawn into when it was released. I think I might have got this one on the day of release. And I think it's because I was drawn into this blue. There are so many palettes that have the kind of pop of blue. I never wear blue eyeshadow. I've worn the blue out of this palette a few times and I don't like how it looks. So I don't know why I let myself be drawn in by this one. But I just really enjoy reaching for this palette. I reached for it today in the first time in a while. The shades that I have on are these two here. Then I have Easy Peasy over the majority of my lid. And then I have this Touring shade here just on the inner corner. So the pan sizes in here are slightly bigger than the usual 12 pan palette. And I feel like the formula is slightly better as well. But this to me is just such a fun palette, and it is one when I did originally get it, I say if it kind of covered up the blue, yes, okay, it is kind of a neutral palette, but to me the shades are just that little bit brighter, they are that little bit easier to work with, and whenever I open this palette I get a little bit excited as to what look I'm going to create, and I'm never disappointed with the looks that I do create from this palette. This is one that to me is kind of a spring summer palette, but I do really like reaching for it all year round. And it is one of those ones that I kind of always forget that I have, and then when I see it in my box of palettes I get excited to use it all over again. So yeah, I would say this falls into the Sparks Joy category. Then we have the newest palette in my collection, and that is one from Nomad Cosmetics. This one is still in the box because this literally arrived the other day. This is the Marrakesh palette and has absolutely stunning packaging. I haven't even really touched this one at all. I've literally opened it and had a look. I've not swatched it, anything like that. This is one that I got in a deal from Tribe Beauty Box. They had a deal on their website where you could pick 3 items for, I think it was $40 or £40 or something. And I've been wanting to try something from Nomad Cosmetics for the longest time, but their shipping from their website direct is quite pricey, whereas from Tribe Beauty Box it wasn't too expensive, and this was one of the palettes that I had my eye on, so it was perfect opportunity to get it and then also get 2 other products all for £40. So I'm really excited to break into this, try the formula, see what it's about, and then perhaps, not that I need any more eyeshadow, I might purchase something else from them because they do have, I think it's a 9 pan palette that I've got my eye on as well. But just thought it was a really fun colour story. You've got your kind of staple neutrals over here, but then you have got some really pretty jewel tones and brighter shades over here as well. So yeah, excited to give this one a go, but gorgeous packaging, and I have heard good things about their formula. So yeah, this is the newest palette in my collection, literally fresh out of the box. And then the final question is the first palette that I used in 2022, and that is another collaboration between Star Wars and The Mandalorian, and is the Mandalorian palette. So this is a palette that my husband actually got me for Christmas. I did order it when it first came out and then kind of gave it to him, and he just gave it to me for Christmas. So I've used it I think once or twice since then, and it is a really nice palette. But it is the palette that I used on New Year's Day, so definitely the first one I used in 2022. I do feel slightly intimidated by this palette, to be honest. It is darker than I thought it would be, but I feel like it has got a couple of unique shades in here, especially this Clan of 2 one in the middle, which I haven't tried yet. But I am really intrigued by it, and I do want to use this palette a bit more, but say it is new to my collection, but I did use this one first in 2022. So that is all my answers to the eyeshadow palette tag part 2. Like I said, I will have the prompts linked in the description box below, as well as Samantha and Allie's videos who created this tag. But other than that, that is it for today's video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already. Thanks.